Hey guys, this is Mark Goldberg from Mark Vlogs Watches, and we're just going to talk a smidgen about Rolex and Rolex marketing, Rolex advertising strategies, Rolex perception, Rolex brand perception specifically. So before we get started, let's go and do a quick wristwatch check. You can take a look. I'm wearing it's a Breitling Super Ocean steel fish chronograph with the 7750 Valjoux movement in it. Let's take a look at a couple of Rolexes real quick, and then let's talk about brand perception, and then let's get into the meat and potatoes of this quick little video talking about Rolex advertising strategies. I know I'm yakking a lot in this video, so here's a couple of quick looks at watches. On the left, the pre-ceramic no-date sub, and on the right, the two-tone bluesy, also pre-ceramic. A couple of watches that I like. They're vintage-esque anyway. They're sitting in the safe right now, gathering dust. And here we have a look at my German Shepherd. Love her. She's gone, but I loved her dearly. And we're looking here at the Batman, the BLNR, which is one of those watches that is controlled and that Rolex somewhat inflates the value of by keeping the supply low and the demand high. Speaking of which, have a look at the first iteration of the Deep Sea Sea Dweller. This is the James Cameron edition. It's actually the only Rolex ever officially named after anybody, but it's one of those watches which Rolex has controlled tightly the supply of and therefore kept the demand and the price artificially, I would say, high. So on some level, you have to ask yourself, why is it that we like what we like? There's increasingly product placement in television shows, and hey, James Bond has worn every kind of watch imaginable, and you don't think that that's the producers of those movies just going, let's throw a mega bone and put a Seamaster on James Bond. Oh no, they pay for that kind of stuff. Now you're gonna see me look over here at my computer, because what I wanna do is I wanna read you up the latest figure that I was able to find where an advertising marketing agency deduced and kind of pieced together how much Rolex spent on advertising in a given year. Was the year 2013, when Rolex reputedly spent $61.48 million on advertising in a single year. Now, if you read gentlemen's magazines, car magazines, I get the Porsche magazine, and Rolex sometimes has advertising in that. Gentleman's Quarterly, just like rich guy magazines, Fortune magazine. Rolex is often in there with some kind of an advertisement. The New York Times, other sort of upscale newspapers, and television. In fact, Rolex spent about $6 million on advertising for the Oscars this year. In 2018, February 2018, Rolex blew 10% of what they spent back in 2013. This year, they spent 10% of that all in 1 hour. $6 million in an hour for a couple of commercials on the Oscars. So you have to ask yourself, how much is that factoring in to our love of the brand? Have they basically crafted a mindset that this is a luxury item worth every penny, that you will keep having your $5,000, that Rolex is above and beyond? Now, as we know, there is a trinity of watches, the holy trinity of horology, which is Vacheron, Constantin, Audemars Piguet. Why do the two of the three have French names? I don't know. And then the third one is, why am I blanking out for just the moment? I'm going to have to think it through. No, I forget. Oh, crap. It's not Cartier. That is another French name. Crap. Hang on. I'll be right back. You get to see me think. Maybe I don't have to turn it off. Audemars Piguet. Vacheron Constantin. Patek Philippe! Oh, mon Dieu! How is it possible that I have had a brain fart to this, had a senior moment, guys? So, Patek Philippe. Weird, they all three have French names. Rolex doesn't even factor into that, category on the one hand. On the other hand, so many people regard it as the brand. Now, mind you, it is financially more accessible somewhat than those three horologically more significant brands. However, these things are freaking expensive. Rolex is a very expensive brand. Now, one of the things that people like me really value about Rolex is what we would call retained value. That is to say, you drive a Ford off the lot and 15 minutes later your Ford is worth 27% less than what you paid for it. And that is true of most watch brands. It's also true of Rolex, but it is less true, which is to say a used Rolex is going to hold a higher percentage of value than most any other brand. So that certainly is in its favor. But listen, guys, don't forget, Rolex is paying millions upon millions of dollars to create an image. And that image is one of wealth, culture, value, and that value actually translates itself all the way over to retained value, so that if you sell a used Rolex, you're going to get more for it than you will a used Breitling. I bought this watch for something like 2/3 less than its original value, and that just doesn't happen in the Rolex brand. Now, of course, a lot of that is supported by marketing. It's a fine product, no doubt. But listen, Rolex makes something like 1 million watches a year, and although physical human hands touch those watches at some stage, a huge percentage of the activity, the manufacturing activity on a Rolex is done by robot. These guys have invested billions of dollars in robotic technology. So yes, there's human activity that, maybe the hands are set by humans, but boy, most of that stuff is done by robot. Another thing that you have to remember about Rolex is, the law of supply and demand. The more demand there is for something with a limited supply, the higher the price is going to go. And we have seen Rolex manipulate the market viciously and constantly. Why is it that most of, at least for the last 6 months of 2017, if you would walk into a Rolex authorized dealer, they didn't have any of the Steel Sports Rolexes. No Submariners, no GMTs. They just didn't have these watches, no steel Daytonas. And now with the advent of the Pepsi bezel steel Rolex coming out on the Jubilee bracelet, I can assure you they could turn out, they could have 100,000 of those watches in dealers' hands in 6 months if they wanted to. They don't want to. They don't want that at all. They want everybody coming into the authorized dealer to see if they can see that watch, but very few people are going to be able to actually purchase it from the authorized dealer. If you've got a hankering for a Pepsi bezel steel Rolex, you're going to wait a long time, or you're going to buy it on the gray market for well over list. So Rolex manipulates the supply in order to create additional demand. I think that they do that not only to support prices, but also critically to create cachet. Cachet is that certain insouciance. It's brand image is what it is. It's perception. It's the perception that says this is a scarce, rare, and especially valuable brand, and you're lucky to get your hands on one. So this is all done through manipulation of price and supply. I think they deliberately tighten down the manufacturing process on watches that they want to support the pricing on, and they're busy spending what they're going to spend in 2018. We do not know grand total, but we know they spent $5 to $6 million on Oscar night alone. So I don't think it's a big stretch of imagination to imagine that they're going to spend $70 to $75 million this year in maintaining the brand. Now, we don't know what Rolex makes top line, let alone bottom line, on an annual basis. That's because it's privately held in the hands of, as you may or may not know, Hans Wilsdorf, who was the owner of Rolex, died and left it to a foundation. So Rolex is actually now a charitable foundation. They are not a public company at all who has to release their figures. So they are really accountable to nobody. And how they even spend their money, they're secretive. So we don't really know how the foundation spends their money, or at least I guess I should say I don't know. That might be an interesting topic for an upcoming video. Although if you know anything about that, please put it in the comments. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I do know that Rolex is held by a charitable foundation, and therefore they don't really have to release any of their numbers or any of their figures. And that gives them a great deal more economic secrecy, or the ability to be secretive about their numbers. So what I'm telling you guys, take this, I am a Rolex fanboy. So if you're a Rolex fanboy, I'm right there with you. but they are using manipulation of manufacturing production schedules to keep supply down of certain watches. That keeps demand and price up. Meantime, they're spending, tucking up into maybe the $100 million range, a little below that, I think, but they're getting up into that range, and that's per year. So they will have spent in the last 10 years easily $500 million. $500 million, B as in boy. They will have spent $500 million in the last 10 years creating the cachet, that little certain something that makes my eyes gleam when I see a Rolex. So I have a couple of questions for you that I'd like you to answer for me in the comments. And that is that, am I a schmuck for loving this brand? Even though I understand what they're doing, I still have a love for the brand. How about you guys? Tell me, what do you think about Rolex? And do you think that they're artificially controlling production? Do you agree with me on all this stuff? And what do you think about that enormous Rolex advertising budget? Oh, and by the way, have you seen any of the Rolex commercials that were shown on the Oscars? You can look them up on YouTube. Tell me what you think about this, guys. Hey, do me a favor, like and subscribe my video. I really appreciate it. I would love you as a subscriber, because then we can do this all over again.